Renata Blythe was 41 years old the Saturday evening. Her husband opened the front door of their home in Nashville and walked in with 3 women she had never met, wearing a smile she had seen on his face before. The one he used when he believed he was the most powerful person in a room. She was standing in the kitchen at the time. She heard the door. She heard the laughter, 3 voices unfamiliar. One she recognized. And she heard him say, loudly enough to carry through the hallway, that she probably wouldn't mind them stopping by, that she wouldn't be much company anyway. One of the women said something low, and the others laughed again. The sound traveled the full length of the house. She had been paying the mortgage on that house alone for 11 of the 14 years they had lived in it. She had done it quietly, from accounts he did not know the full balance of, because she was a corporate attorney who had spent 20 years understanding exactly what it meant to hold an asset in your own name. What Terence Blythe did not know, what none of the women he had walked through that door knew, was that the house was not the only thing Renata held in her own name. The building where Terence ran his financial consulting practice, the building he paid rent into every month, the building his entire professional reputation was housed in, was owned by a holding company Renata had registered in Delaware 8 years ago. He had been writing her a check every month without knowing it. What happened in the weeks that followed would make certain he understood every number on every one of those checks. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Elmwood Avenue was a 1940s craftsman that Renata had found before Terence had any interest in finding it. In the 3rd year of their marriage, during a period when she was billing 90-hour weeks at a downtown Nashville firm and spending her Saturdays walking neighborhoods with a notepad because she needed something to do on Saturdays that was not work. She had a habit, instilled by her grandfather, of looking at things that were undervalued and seeing what they could be with patience and the right kind of attention. The craftsman had good bones and poor decisions layered over them, dropped ceilings, carpet over hardwood, wallpaper in 4 competing patterns in the dining room. She had looked at it for 15 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon and made an offer the following morning. She had renovated it over 2 years, on evenings and weekends and in the slow weeks between major cases, making decisions about materials and light and the flow of rooms with the deliberateness she brought to contracts. The front porch was her work. She had rebuilt the railing herself, using reclaimed heart pine that her grandfather had sourced from a demolition site in East Nashville and driven over in his truck on a Saturday, specifically because he had wanted to be part of it. He was a retired contractor of 40 years, a man who had built things across Nashville with his own hands, and who believed, with the conviction of someone who had earned the belief, that anything you built yourself carried a different weight than anything you bought complete. He had told Renata once, when she was 11 years old and impatient about something she no longer remembered, the people who take things from you can only take what they know you have. He had not elaborated. He had not needed to. She had thought about it every day since she passed the bar exam. She had met Terence Blythe at a firm social event 16 years ago, when she was 35 and billing the kind of hours that left little room for anything that required sustained attention. He had been there on the periphery of a client group her firm was entertaining, a financial consultant who had worked with one of their corporate accounts, credentialed and easy in conversation. The kind of man who made professional events feel slightly less like obligation. He was quick and polished, and had the confident ease of someone who had learned early that confidence could function as its own credential. He could read a room and work it, and make you feel, by the end of it, that you had been the most interesting person there. She had liked that before she understood that it was a skill he applied broadly and without specific loyalty. They had married after 2 years, and a small ceremony at the house on Elmwood Avenue that she had already been renovating, in the backyard that she had cleared herself with a rented tiller the spring before. Her grandfather gave a toast. He said, briefly and without ceremony, that Renata had always known the difference between something built to last and something built to impress, and he hoped that what they were building that day was the former. The guests laughed warmly. Renata had looked at her grandfather and understood he was saying something specific and had filed it. She had loved Terence genuinely in those early years, with the full and committed attention she brought to anything she decided was worth her time. She had also, from the beginning, maintained the habits her grandfather and her legal training had given her. Separate accounts, separate records, a personal hard drive with its own encrypted folders, updated monthly, on the first of every month, without exception. She had explained this to Terence early in their marriage as professional habit, which it partly was. He had accepted the explanation without curiosity, which told her something she had noted but not yet needed to act on. The first financial irregularity had appeared in year 3. A joint account transfer of $4,200 to a destination she didn't recognize, described in the memo field as equipment, a category their shared household had no expenses in. She had asked about it over dinner. His answer was smooth and specific, and arrived without the hesitation that genuine memory would have produced. She had looked at him across the table and understood, with the clinical clarity that good attorneys developed for distinguishing true statements from constructed ones, that what she had just heard was the second version of a story, not the first. She had not pressed. She had photographed the bank statement and filed it. She was a corporate attorney. The most important documents in any case were rarely the most obvious ones. The important ones were the ones that fit quietly into a pattern you could only see from the right distance. She had started building the distance in year 3, and had been building it methodically ever since. By the time Terence walked through the front door with 3 women on a Saturday evening in October, that folder had been growing for 6 years and contained documentation she could have presented in any court in Tennessee without preparation. She was not surprised. She was not undone. She was simply the woman who had been carrying this house for 11 years. Standing in the kitchen she had renovated herself, listening to someone else's laughter move down the hallway of a structure none of them understood as well as she did. She turned off the burner on the stove. She picked up her phone, walked to the bedroom, and closed the door. She had a call to make. The laughter continued for 2 hours. She sat in the bedroom with the door closed and her laptop open and let it continue, because stopping it was not the task in front of her and had never been. The task was documentation. She had understood that since year 3, and tonight had simply given her the final data point she had been waiting for. Not a clue, not a suspicion, but a confirmed character exhibition that would, in a legal proceeding, be described accurately and without embellishment as a deliberate act of domestic humiliation. She made a note of the date, the time, the number of people, the specific language she had heard through the hallway. She noted it the way she noted everything, calmly, precisely, for the record. She was not hiding. She was working. She retrieved the complete 6-year documentation file from the encrypted drive she kept on her personal laptop, a file she updated on the first of every month, organized chronologically, sourced entirely from records she had every legal right to access. Bank statements for the joint accounts, organized by year. Transfer records for 2 shared business accounts, a timeline she had built in the first year of the project that she updated whenever a new data point emerged, and the folder she had labeled, without drama, second mortgage. The story that the documentation told was the following. Over 11 years, Terence had quietly removed a total of $112,000 from accounts they shared, in transfers ranging from $800 to $6,000, each one individually defensible as a business expense or personal withdrawal, collectively forming a pattern that a forensic accountant could map in an afternoon. He had also, in the 5th year of the marriage, taken a second mortgage on a Brentwood property they co-owned, a property Renata had paid the down payment on from her own funds, without her knowledge, without her consent, and with a signature on the loan application that was not hers. She had discovered the second mortgage 4 years later through a routine property record search she had run for an unrelated legal matter. She had pulled the loan documents through a public records request. She had compared the signature on the application to her own handwriting across 40 different exemplars. The conclusion had not required a professional opinion to reach, though she had obtained one anyway. She had known about the forged signature for 2 years. She had been waiting for the moment that made moving correct. Her hands did not shake as she organized the final folder. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined her. At 9:20, she heard the front door open and close, and the voices recede down the porch steps and out toward the street. She heard Terrence move through the kitchen. She heard the television come on. She gave it 5 minutes. Then, she opened the bedroom door, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and said, without particular emphasis, that she hoped the evening had gone well. He said it had. He said it easily, with the composure of a man who had done what he did and expected no consequence. She noted that too. She went back to the bedroom and opened her laptop and sent one email to an attorney she had known for 22 years, a woman named Brenda Cole, whose practice in Nashville was built around financial fraud in marriage, and who had been waiting for this particular subject line for longer than either of them had discussed directly. The subject line read, "Ready to proceed." Tools, her grandfather had always said, were meant to work, not shine. She had spent 6 years building this one. It was ready. Brenda Cole had been practicing family and financial law in Nashville for 24 years. She was 63, composed, and had the specific quality of not being disturbed by anything she heard in a client meeting. Not because she was indifferent, but because she had heard most of it before and understood that composure was what her clients needed most, and drama was what they could least afford. She had known Renata since a case they had worked adjacent to, years back, and she understood, from the moment Renata sat down across from her desk and placed the accordion folder on the table, that this was not a consultation. It was a briefing. She reviewed the documentation without speaking for 45 minutes. When she finished, she made 4 notes on a yellow legal pad and set down her pen. She said, "The forged signature on the second mortgage is the strongest piece." Renata said, "I had it compared by a handwriting analyst 2 years ago. I have her written opinion in the folder." Brenda said, "Good." She made a 5th note. "The asset diversion over 11 years. How confident are you in the accounting? I have 3 years verified by a forensic CPA I consulted independently. The remaining 8 are based on my own documentation, which I am prepared to stand behind." Brenda looked at her. "He has no idea you have any of this." Renata said, "He brought 3 women to my home last Saturday because he believed I had no leverage and no recourse. That is the full extent of his understanding of my situation." Brenda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the particular brevity of someone who had enough professional discipline not to say more than was necessary, "Then we have everything we need." She paused. "And Renata, the commercial property in the Gulch, the one he has his practice in?" Renata said, "Held by a Delaware LLC that is registered entirely in my name. He has been writing rent checks since 2016. He has never asked who owns the building." Brenda set down her pen entirely. She looked at Renata for a long moment, the way people look when they have finally taken the full measure of something they had been underestimating. She said, "He has been paying you rent for 8 years." Renata said, "Yes, real power," she thought on the drive home, operated in rooms the people it protected never had to enter. She went home and made dinner that evening, and set the table for 2, and called Terence from the kitchen when it was ready, and sat across from him and asked about a business conference he had mentioned attending the following week. She listened to his answer. She noted the ease in his posture, the specific ease of a man who had done something he considered decisive and was waiting for it to register without knowing it already had. She passed the salad. She refilled his glass. She had been a corporate attorney for 20 years. She knew exactly when a deal was already done and when the other party simply hadn't been informed yet. She was not angry. She was ready. Some things you did not say until you were in the right room. That Friday, her grandfather drove over from his house in Madison with a jar of sourwood honey from a neighbor's bees and sat at her kitchen table and ate the biscuits she made every time he visited. She told him, carefully and in full, what she had assembled and what she intended to do with it. He listened with the attention of a man who had spent 40 years building things that needed to hold weight and understood completely what it meant to construct something that could not be argued with. When she finished, he looked at his hands for a moment. He said, "You kept your own records." She said, "Since the beginning." He said, "Then you already won. The meeting is just the delivery." She looked at him and thought about the railing she had rebuilt on the front porch, the reclaimed heart pine he had driven over in his truck, board by board, because he had wanted to be part of what she was building. She thought about what it meant to have been taught, before she understood what she was being taught, that the things worth having were the ones you built yourself and documented carefully, and did not hand over without knowing exactly what you were giving away. She would not be handing anything over. The meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in the conference room at Brenda Cole's office, with a view of the Cumberland River through the west-facing windows and the kind of morning light that made everything look clear. Terence arrived believing he was attending a mediation discussion about a property matter Brenda's office had described as routine. He came in his good suit. He sat at the table. He saw Renata across from him, and something shifted in his posture. Not fear, not yet, but the first adjustment of a man beginning to realize that the room he was in was not configured the way he had expected. Beside Renata sat Brenda Cole. Across from Brenda sat a man named Patrick Greer, whom Terence did not know, a forensic CPA who had spent 15 years in marital asset cases in Tennessee and whose very presence, Brenda had told Renata, tended to communicate something specific to the opposing party before a word was spoken. Terence looked at the table. He looked at Renata. Renata looked back at him the way she looked at every contract she had been handed to review, with full attention and no expression that could be misread as weakness. Brenda opened the first folder, 11 years of documented joint account transfers, organized by fiscal year, totaling $112,000, with a methodology of diversion annotated in Patrick Greer's clean-sourced hand. Brenda named the amounts. She named the years. She did not raise her voice. Brenda opened the second folder. The second mortgage, the deed of trust filed in Davidson County without Renata's knowledge. The handwriting analysis, 3 pages, from a certified forensic document examiner, concluding that the signature on the loan application was not Renata Blythe's signature. Brenda set the handwriting analyst's written opinion directly in front of Terence. He looked at it. He did not touch it. Brenda said, "Miss Blythe, the signature on this loan instrument constitutes mortgage fraud under Tennessee Code Annotated, a Class D felony. We have already filed a report with the Davidson County District Attorney's Office. We are not here this morning to negotiate that matter." We are here to resolve the civil matters relating to the marital estate." Terence looked at Renata. There was something behind his eyes that she had seen before in opposing counsel, who had walked into a room with the wrong assumptions and taken a moment to understand the full shape of what was in front of them. He said her name. He said it the way people said the names of things they were only now understanding they had underestimated. His attorney, seated beside him, placed a hand on his arm. From the folder she had brought herself, Renata produced a single sheet. A printout from the Delaware Secretary of State's business registry, the registration documents for the holding company that owned the commercial property on Demonbrough Street in the Gulch, the building Terence's consulting practice had occupied for 8 years. Her name, printed clearly as sole member of the LLC. Dated November 2016. She set it on the table in front of him. She said, "You have been a tenant of mine for 8 years. The building you built your practice in is mine. The lease renews in 47 days." The room was very quiet. His attorney was reading something. Terence was not reading anything. He was looking at Renata with an expression she recognized as the final stage of a certain kind of reckoning. The moment when a person understood that the ground they had been standing on belonged to someone else, and had belonged to someone else for longer than they could account for. He said, "Renata, She said, "I am not angry, Terence. I want to be clear about that." She folded her hands on the table. "I built this carefully, and I documented everything I built. You had 14 years to understand what you were living inside of. That is not my failure." She stood. She picked up her portfolio. She said, "Brenda will handle everything from here." She walked out of the conference room and into the hallway and pressed the button for the elevator. While she waited, she looked out the window at the Cumberland, which was wide and unhurried and moving in the direction it had always moved. She had been to that river many times. She had grown up beside rivers that moved like that. Not fast, not dramatic, just continuous and inevitable. She took the elevator down. She walked out into the Nashville morning. She had built everything worth keeping. She did not look back. 10 months later, the house on Elmwood Avenue was hers in full. Not a negotiation, not a compromise, but a settlement that had accounted for every dollar she had documented, and a number of dollars she had not needed to document because the mortgage fraud charge had moved through the district attorney's office with the efficiency of a case built on a certified forensic opinion and 11 years of organized records. Terence had surrendered his financial consulting license as a condition of the plea arrangement on the fraud charge. His practice, formerly housed in her building, which had been released from its lease arrangement and subsequently leased to a women's financial literacy nonprofit, at a rate Renata found more satisfying than any market-rate tenant could have produced, had dissolved in the months following. He was working in a different city now. The mutual acquaintances who mentioned him did so briefly, and with the careful neutrality of people who understood that the ground had shifted permanently, and that the wrong comment would be long remembered. His mother, a woman Renata had liked genuinely and still sent a card to at Christmas, had made clear, through a mutual friend, that she regarded the matter as fully and finally her son's own doing. The 3 women from that Saturday night, whoever they were and wherever they had gone, had never appeared in any of the proceedings, and were not a factor in any of the outcomes. Renata's practice had grown. She had made partner 3 years earlier and was now chairing the transactional litigation group at her firm, overseeing a team of 11 attorneys and billing more hours than she would have if anyone had asked her to count them. Which no one did, because no one needed to. She had also, quietly and without announcement, begun serving on the board of a legal aid organization that represented women in complex marital financial fraud cases. A role she had been asked to take by Brenda Cole, who had said she needed someone on the board who actually understood the architecture of what they were fighting. There was a man named Darius, a civil engineer who had done structural assessments on 2 of her grandfather's former properties, and who had, over the course of the work, found reasons to call her about things that were not strictly professional. He was careful and steady, and asked questions the way people asked questions when they actually wanted to hear the answer. She liked him in the same uncomplicated way she liked things that were well made. On a Sunday morning in March, she sat on the front porch of the house on Elmwood Avenue with a cup of coffee and the brief she was preparing for a case that would go to mediation in 2 weeks. The reclaimed heart pine railing her grandfather had helped her install was exactly as it had been on the day they set it. Solid, level, the color of something old and kept well. The red maple in the front yard had come in early this year, and the light through it was the best kind, broken and moving. Her grandfather called at 9. He asked how the brief was going. She told him it was going the way things went when you had built the argument correctly from the start. He said, "That is the only way." She said she knew. He said he knew she knew. She set the phone down on the railing and picked up her coffee and looked at the street in the morning and thought about nothing in particular. Bitterness required ongoing investment in people who no longer deserved it. She had more important things to invest in. She turned back to the brief. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.